Okay, I think that we will start the meeting officially if you want to get the recording started. We may take a pause after announcements, but let's start with announcements, and this is brief announcements that you have of community interest. So does anyone here in the room have an announcement to make? Okay, we need the microphone.
Want to speak too loud?
No, just
Okay. Hi, Peter Warfield, Library Users Association. Something very interesting at the Board of Supervisors that I found really thrilling. Raphael Mandelman, Supervisor Mandelman, was introducing a measure that would end remote public comment at supervisor meetings. And there was a huge outpouring of organizations and individuals. It was lovely to hear Bruce speaking against it, as almost everybody who was there did. Lisa Aubrey, I think she's listening or watching, and she was another name. I don't know, Bruce, do you know other names from the group?
go on with your point.
Yeah. So anyway, it's terrific. The legislation is 22-1008. If you want to comment, you can send a letter to the Board of Supervisors and reference that, what it is you want to have happen with respect to remote public comment. 22-1008 wants to end it in March.
Welcome.
And all the speakers going
to beverage or something to eat.
It was really wonderful to hear all the different reasons and explanations and effects that having it versus not having it. As a library guy, I'm concerned that the library brings a lot of materials, does a lot of work, and spends a lot of money. But if you want to listen to anything at the library, and I've spoken to the commission about this at length, looks like maybe they're moving a little bit. The head of the library isn't too interested, but if you want to hear Martin Luther King's speech or any other thing at the library, you've got to bring the gear. They will not give you a earphone or a headphone with which to listen. They don't have CD players or DVD players for the materials that are in that format and so on. Basically, if you want to hear anything like Martin Luther King's speech, which they have, you have to bring your own player, you have to bring your own earphones or headphones and so on. And I think that's very wrong, and it hurts the most vulnerable people. So if anybody would like to express themselves, write to the library, write to libraryusers2004@yahoo.com.
Thank you.
And the library also has a new strategic plan. You might want to look at the last month's agenda to see what it says. It looks, let's say, very interesting, but also very digitally and architecturally oriented. I sadly see a continuation of de-bookification, for example, where they have more and more electronic materials and sometimes only electronic materials.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
All right, let me ask the Zoom room, has anybody raised their hand to make an announcement? Okay, as we go through the meeting, I will be asking, first of all, people who are here live, the first two people who want to make a comment or ask a question, then we will go to the Zoom room. So if you feel like you would like to be able to make a comment or ask a question of our speaker, put your hand up in Zoom. Yes, and if Lisa, do you have an announcement?
I'm sorry, Tess. I do. I just want the group assembled to be aware of the DMV site going forward. We are getting ready to organize neighbors, residents, and folks to push back seems the mayor is dragging her feet about development at that site. And these are very new, nascent plans, but supposedly we have only until the end of February to really organize and message the state about building affordable housing there. We will have a more cogent statement, but I want people to put this on their radar because we're going to
we'll see how lively it is.
need help organizing. And
Yeah.
I believe what we're going to do is do a petition and have people email the state to say, we want to build deeply affordable housing at the DMV site. Right now it's a choice, rebuild the DMV or DMV plus affordable housing. And I think probably Supervisor Preston will speak a little bit more about this, but I just want people to have this on their radar. Okay, thank you.
And I have an announcement that, how many of you heard about Tyree Nichols' death? And how many of you heard about the death in San Francisco of Sean Moore and Keita O'Neill back in 2017? Well, there are going to be 2 rallies at the courthouse to support the family and friends of these 2 men who were untimely cut down by our San Francisco police. And Wednesday, March 1st, from 9 to 11, they're asking people to show up and support the families. And Friday, March 10th, from 9 to 11 also. So I think if you can, please join. And I do have a couple copies of the newspaper story today in the Chronicle if you have it, if you wanted to see it. So that I believe it will be at the courthouse, and which one I will guess I will know later. But it's 9 to 11 on March 1st or March 10th. There'll be 2 different cases, and I don't have the exact courthouse location yet. So, yeah. Will the police be held accountable? Okay. Now tonight, we have 2 speakers to talk about housing, and I should say 3 speakers to talk about housing. Our supervisor, Dean Preston, and we have from the Rep Coalition, Chantel and Joseph, and I'll ask you 2 to introduce yourselves in a few minutes. What we're going to do is let Dean speak for a few minutes in general, take a couple of general questions or comments. Then we'll have Joseph and Chantel speak and then open the floor to questions for all 3 speakers. Sound okay? All right. So, Dean, if you'd come up here to the sacred blue spot on the floor and use this mic. So you don't need to project.
Okay. Just need to project for people here.
Yeah,
All right.
that's just for them.
All right, thank you, Tess, and thanks, Bruce. Good to hear. I'm really glad that the Rep Coalitions folks, Joseph and Chantel, are here because they can answer all like the hard, in-depth questions that you actually have. Because I know they've studied like every page of the housing element. But I did want to just talk a little bit about just some reflections around the housing element that the Board of Supervisors unanimously approved, and some issues specific to District 5 that Lisa mentioned one of them that we'd love to have your partnership on. So not surprisingly, the housing element has big, ambitious goals and a lot of good content. There's a lot of good input from community groups that's reflected in this document, and strategies that we all have fought together for, things like homelessness prevention work and right to counsel and affordable housing requirement. I mean, it's all in there. So I want to give credit where it's due to a lot of the range of strategies on affordable housing that are in the housing element. And just so folks know, because there's a lot of lingo and acronyms, I mean, the housing element is required. Basically, it's a roadmap every 8 years that the state requires every county to do. And so we have basically goals that we have to meet over an 8-year period in terms of creation of housing. The problem is, as with so much of the housing discussion, is a very deliberate attempt to conflate market rate housing that is affordable only to the top 10, maybe 15, 20% of income earners in San Francisco and big real estate investors, to conflate that with affordable housing of all different types that's affordable to low income people and to working class people, right? And so when you hear talk of the housing element, and when you talk about, and you hear the mayor's speech today, it's rarely talking about the different types of housing, and it's always just talking about housing, right? And that's become the new strategy, new for the last 5 years, strategy really of the development community, the real estate interests, the YIMBYs. That the strategy is to, are you for housing? Are you against housing? Never talking about housing for who, right? So the good news is that the housing element actually lays out goals for affordable housing, not just the general housing. So it's about 82,000 units of housing overall. 46,000 of those over the next 8 years are supposed to be of different levels of affordability. That's the good news, that we have a big ambitious target, a lot of which is affordable housing. The bad news is we've kind of seen this movie before. Over the last 8 years, we had a housing element. We had what are called RHNA goals, the regional housing goals. And the goal was that we were going to try to create 16,000 units over the last 8 years of affordable housing. That was the goal. And guess what we hit? About half, right? So we had a goal of affordable housing of 16,000 units, hit about half. We had a goal on market rate housing. We hit 150% of that goal over the last 8 years. So you don't see that in the Chronicle very much. You don't see that from the development industry, but that's just the reality. We are producing at a pretty substantial level market rate housing over the last 8 years, and really failing to produce the affordable housing that working class San Franciscans, low income San Franciscans need. So now fast forward to the, from the last 8 years to the current housing element, right? The last 8 years, we had goal of 16,000 affordable housing units. Now our goal is 3 times that, right? So if you look at the housing element that the board unanimously approved, that the planning department put together, it sets a goal, not 16,000, 46,000 affordable housing units. So here's the problem. And the reason I go into these details is because I've been very publicly critical of the fact that we are announcing goals that I think as a city, this administration has no intention of actually delivering. And I've held numerous hearings. We all fought together for Prop I. We've generated hundreds of millions of dollars for affordable housing that the administration refuses to spend. Like at some point, there's just a reality check of like, you can write a plan that the state is requiring of us to say you're going to create 46,000 new units of affordable housing, but let's get serious about actually doing it, right? That's what we're all fighting for. What we're doing here on 730 Standing, what we need to be ramping up. And so I did 2 things that I want to bring to your attention before I wrap up. One is we released an affordable housing opportunity sites document. And I think Jenbo, who's here with me from my office, has some copies of. We can email or post the link. I don't know if we can do that in your chat, but to this report. What we did is we said each district should do their share. Our district supports affordable housing, always has, always will, right? especially HANC, you know? And so we laid out 6 major sites that are on publicly owned property or property where the seller has already said they're interested in selling it to the city for affordable housing. So we picked just 6 sites, high potential sites. Lisa mentioned one of them, the DMV site, right? And we go through and we basically said, here's the roadmap. We're saying this to planning, we're saying this to the mayor. Like, you want us to have these goals, great. We can all say we support them. Here's how you do it, right? And so we have 400 Divisadero where we could build a significant number of units, the DMV lot, the huge parking lot behind the Northern Station Police station there, which is just would be great for housing. Parcel K in Hayes Valley. But I can tell you, we're going to need your help in trying to force the administration to create housing on some of these sites. 730 Standing's on there. That one, at least, you know, seems to be proceeding. But there's a political reality, which is that the mayor has decided to attempt to obstruct any affordable housing in the district. You can try to figure out why. And I will just say it's been there's been a real about face on things that we were cooperating on. And we had gotten commitments from the mayor's office, especially 400 Divisadero, which a deal just fell through. Housing developer that was going to buy it, the mayor's administration basically sent the message, we're not going to fund it. And the deal fell through. So I would say it's a really important moment in taking these sites that we put in this and others and pushing back on the administration and saying, you have to get real about affordable housing. If you want to meet these goals, District 5 saying we want the affordable housing here. And it's ridiculous to block those efforts. One other thing that we've done is we announced we will be introducing legislation to allow a third-party affordable housing advocacy group that fights for low-income households. That kind of group will be able to sue the city under certain circumstances under our legislation that we're working on with the city attorney right now, to address exactly the current situation that we're facing somewhere like 400 Divisadero, to address exactly the situation we're facing where we appropriated $64 million, the first dedicated fund for the small sites acquisition program, where we could be doing land trusts all over the city using those funds and leveraging those funds. That money has been sitting in the city's bank account for over a year. Mayor's office refuses to spend it. So I think if we gave the power, now we've done everything we can. We've passed resolutions, we've appropriated the money, but under the city charter, we don't get to order the mayor to spend money. That is in the discretion of the mayor. Normally, you would think in an affordable housing crisis that the administration would want to spend affordable housing money that we have all generated through the ballot, through the board of supervisors, but that's not the case right now. There are tens of millions, probably more accurately, hundreds of millions of dollars we could be spending on affordable housing if the administration would collaborate with us and work with us. I don't think that would stand the light of a courtroom, a judge. I think if a group like the Western Center on Law and Poverty or the, any number of state groups that have, sue cities that engage in discriminatory practices, if a group like that brought a lawsuit, Bay Area Legal Aid, others, in this kind of situation, sure, Rep SF, if a group like that brought a lawsuit because we were failing to hit our targets and we had money to spend that we weren't spending, I think that we create that vehicle. So I will say that this is definitely an innovative approach. It's ridiculous that we have to do this. I think the reality is we should just be able to have a mayor that is willing to spend affordable housing money that the voters have approved already. But we are where we are, and we're not going to just rubber stamp a housing element with bold goals on affordable housing without getting serious about how to deliver on that affordable housing. Last thing, that, and Lisa mentioned it, really excited on the DMV. So we did a motion at the board because we found out that the state, the demolition and rebuild of the DMV with a budget, with no plans to change the huge parking area. They were just going to leave it as a DM. They were just going to demolish the DMV building, rebuild the same thing, and that's it. So we did a resolution of the Board of Supervisors that I authored that passed unanimously, showing the Board of Supervisors support for affordable housing on that site. And to their great credit, the DMV and the DGS, which is the State Government Services Agency, worked with us and with Assemblymember Phil Ting, who's been a big supporter of our effort. It's now for redistricting in his district. And we had great meetings with them. They even though they had already budgeted and were about to start approving the construction contract, they issued an RFI, or request for see if anyone had interest in developing the site. They gave a very short deadline, 30 days. That was the deadline was last Friday. There was some fear among some folks who were skeptical in city government, who thought, they're just setting the timeline, nobody's going to apply, and then they can just proceed. Well, the good news is people apply. People have put in saying they wanted to mixed use housing. I mean, there's a number of proposals. We want to make sure it's affordable housing. So we've requested to get more information on who applied. I know there were a number of applicants, including the Pilates owner, who's right across the street, who's part of a real estate group that developed the Pilates, who's interested. They are one of the applicants. So we'll find out and we'll let you know the details on how many applicants they are. I think it's going to be important for HANC and for everyone to continue to push for that to be affordable housing, not to be a market rate housing site with it's public land. So we feel strongly that it should be affordable housing. So I will wrap up there. Those are most of our major updates. Either take questions, or I've talked for a while. So if you want to go directly to the rep folks, that's fine too. And I will stick around and some questions. Yeah.
I think it's excellent that we will be able to all three speakers be available for questions. Thank you for that offer, Dean. Okay. So, Chantel and Joseph, we're changing the screen view. For the information of those who are live, there's 23 people here on Zoom. And for you on Zoom, there's a dozen people here in the room here at the flywheel. So.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right here in the Zoom room and
Yes.
there in person?
Yes, we can. There you are. Okay. So Chantel and Joseph, please introduce yourselves.
Sure. I am Chantel Labyrinto, she, her. I am with the Race and Equity in All Planning Coalition. I also am an organizer at People Power Media over here with Joseph. I will be making the presentation today. Joseph is here with me for support and to answer maybe any super technical questions folks may have later. But Joseph, I'd like to give you space to introduce yourself too.
Thanks, Chantel, and thanks, everyone. It's good to see you all. Joseph Smook, also with People Power Media and with the Race and Equity in All Planning Coalition. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. I do have slides. I don't know if I can totally not use them if they're not helpful and if the tech won't support them, but just wanted to check in about that with you, Oliver. Sorry, if that was you, Bruce, I recognize your voice, but I couldn't hear what you said.
Yes, and you can share if you'd like.
All right, I will go ahead and share my screen and we'll present at the same time. I'll try to keep an eye on my chat. But hello, everyone. Again, Chantel speaking on behalf of the REP Coalition, Race and Equity in All Planning Coalition. REP is easy to say, REP SF is also easy to say, so you'll hear that shorthand. But I've been invited to speak a bit about REP's Housing Element campaign including our organizing work around it, impacts we've made on the housing element, and some challenges we still have and what our next steps are. And for folks in the room, both virtually and in person, who may not know, HANC is a rep member organization, has been for maybe a year or so now. And we love having members active in rep, and are looking forward to continuing to build our relationship with HANC. So I do have a brief presentation. I will try my best to keep it brief with this slide deck, and then we can open it up for questions and thoughts. So we can go ahead and get started. So bear with me while I move past this slide deck. Great. So I wanted to start with just a quick introduction to our coalition and who we are. REP is a coalition of nearly 40 grassroots organizations from across San Francisco. You'll see here kind of all of our member orgs and their logos here on this screenshot. But we are organizing together for a future with diverse communities, stable, affordable housing, and equitable access to resources and opportunities. We really envision a city in which historically marginalized communities are able to determine our futures, right? And a city where planning processes put the expertise of our communities at the forefront so we can solve issues of displacement and unaffordability and inequality. And I mentioned HANC here is right here, if you can see. I love your logo, it looks great there. And some of your members have played a really active role in our campaigns and in shaping our coalition's advocacy agenda. And we appreciate really getting to learn from you all too, and the work you all do. So that's just a bit about REP. You can check us out more at repsf.org if you're curious about other member organizations. So I know Supervisor Preston covered a lot of it. Folks have been following the housing element for a while, but I just wanted to touch on the housing element, the campaign, what it means for us. But I also just wanted to quickly note that our coalition, while this is one campaign that we've been taking on, we explore and take on many strategies beyond just policy and legislation. Our advocacy agenda also focuses on base building and popular education, which we'll talk more about later, communications and media, potential litigation we're looking into, and direct action as well. But the housing element was a super critical issue, especially in considering what it means for our city and our communities. Great, and I hope everyone can see these slides okay. Tried to make the text as big as possible, but I know y'all are experts already, and all of this will sound super, super familiar, you know, given that Supervisor Preston just spoke about it. But the housing element, you know, it establishes our city's housing policies for the next 8 years. And our mandate from the state was over 82,000 new housing units being built in San Francisco, with 57% of those mandated to be affordable to low and moderate income earners, right? That's around 47,000 units, 57%. One note that we really like to emphasize in discussing our campaign is that the planning department really early on stated its intention for this housing element to be San Francisco's first housing plan centered on racial and social equity. That's a really big and bold statement that has some expectation around it, and is a huge reason why we were focusing our advocacy on this campaign. So regarding our campaign, we engaged in the housing element process for over 2.5 years, a very long time, much like many of you in this room, I'm sure. And again, our goal in engaging was to really ensure that the city actually prioritized its stated goal of being the first housing blueprint to center equity. In hearing that statement to us and to our communities, that should mean that the housing element should be focused on affordability and meeting the housing needs of marginalized communities. But as a coalition, and looking at the drafts that came out and looking at the ways that planning was approaching the housing element, we, you know, found that, of course, it was still largely a market-based plan. We were finding that the overall approach that planning took, you know, really silenced low-income communities and communities of color. It was, you know, focused on deregulating market rate housing And really, as you know, Supervisor Preston mentioned, provided no concrete strategies or resources to seriously meet the affordable housing mandates. So for 2 years, we consistently pushed for equity to be prioritized in the housing element. We read all the hundreds, I want to say thousands of pages of every draft and coordinated and provided really, really detailed feedback from all of our member organizations in the coalition on every draft. And we repeatedly offered to collaborate with planning, right? We were like, if this is your stated goal, if y'all want to focus on equity, like let's talk to communities who can really direct that conversation. But again, we were seeing no meaningful changes as each draft came out. So our coalition's answer was to create the citywide people's plan. And I'll put it right here up on this screen. And the link is here if folks want to read it. It is on our website, but the citywide people's plan is REP's visionary blueprint, laying out housing and land use policies that truly center racial, social, and economic equity. And it's also built off of a lot of the work that our communities have been doing for decades, really, around community planning in different neighborhoods. We really wanted to emphasize community expertise in this plan. So many community-based organizations around the city have histories of doing community planning and engaging community members. And, you know, expertise can be more, can exist outside of just, you know, bureaucrats in the planning department. A lot of our community members have the exact same degrees as those in planning. And, you know, a lot of them have a lot of other expertise outside of just academia that have a lot of value. But we were consistently seeing that our visions and solutions for equity that have been developed over decades were and are constantly ignored. So this plan really tries to emphasize that expertise that we know that our communities have. So we published this in November. It's been a couple of months now, and it was sent to planning commissioners and planning staff, as well as the Board of Supervisors. And we really tried to put some pressure through a rally we held back on November 15th at City Hall at the Board of Supervisors Committee of the Whole hearing on the housing element, where Supervisor Preston, you know, asked some really hard questions of planning folks there. And, you know, our demand was really that planning and the Board of Supervisors push to include solutions from this people's plan into the housing element. And it really was only within those last few months before it was passed, you know, just the other week, that planning began to incorporate some of our recommendations into the housing element. I'll go to the next slide. Of course, we did not get everything we wanted into the housing element, but we believe that without our advocacy, the city wouldn't have had a real pathway to its goal of centering equity or meeting the affordable mandates. So we were able to achieve getting some good language in the housing element, including commitments for affordable housing, including major new local and state funding with new transparency and accountability requirements. Commitments, we'll talk more about what commitments mean and what actions actually mean for buying sites for affordable housing development and for the housing preservation program as well. Committing to new development capacity and strategies to make sure that most of the housing built on the west side of the city is affordable. In regards to community engagement and expertise, we had some language in there to strengthen community engagement and meaningful input into project approvals and rezonings, including affordability levels, number of family units, and generally what gets built. And a commitment that communities should lead the discussions to determine what happens with the Central Freeway. We know that that's going to be an ongoing campaign, something that we'll have to keep an eye out on. And then protecting tenants from displacement, some language was able to be added in commitments. We're retaining conditional use authorization requirements for all proposed demolitions and denying project approvals if developers are not able to meet strict relocation and permanent rent control requirements. And I'm sure I can make this slide deck available for folks who might want to read it again later. I know it's a lot of information to process and take in at once. And in terms of what's kind of next and what's going on with the housing element now that it's been passed. It is now in its implementation phase. And we know that there are still challenges, right? The commitments we got, the language we got in represent some major steps forward. But we know there's still a lot of work to do. We made it really clear to planning and the city that we want this document to be more than just words on paper, and that commitments don't mean very much without actionable plans, right? Similar to what Supervisor Preston was saying a moment ago. We want them to turn this language into real, concrete, and meaningful change. So some of the challenges we still see are a list here. It's not a very short list, of course, but how do we really protect tenants from displacement as a result of demolitions? Some challenges include, identifying and securing resources as soon as possible for an affordable first strategy, including for the next fiscal year. Getting Prop I dollars dedicated to building our affordable housing to meet our mandates. Supervisor Preston just spoke to that a moment ago as well. Diffusing the developer dirty bomb, that's what our coalition's been using as a term, but that's in reference to that circuit breaker that was added to the housing element a bit late in the game. Prioritizing housing that's affordable for households with extremely low and low incomes. Protecting all existing sources of affordable housing, including inclusionary, which I know has been a topic of discussion and something that might be threatened at the moment. Retaining input from communities of color, low-income communities, and cultural districts in development decisions, and preventing and eliminating homelessness through more permanent housing, not just temporary housing, and improving shelter access and the coordinated entry system. And just speaking again to how critical it is to get these commitments to be real. I know land banking is a strategy in the housing element, yet I'm sure some folks were listening to the hearing a few weeks back when MOHCD basically said, we don't really have a real strategy to land bank sites, right? So we know that there's, that's kind of a concrete example of strategies and language in the housing element and what's actually going to be implemented. So we want to see those made real. And I swear I'm almost done. Thank you for hanging in there with me. Oops, let me go back. I'm going a little forward, my bad. The rezonings and upzonings that are part of the housing element implementation plan are targeted in what they're calling well-resourced neighborhoods, which are primarily on the west side of the city. And if we take a look at this map, I hope folks can see it. The Haight is part of the plan, the areas that are planned to be upzoned and rezoned. So that will have some impact, of course, for your organization and the communities you're connected to. So that leads us to what's next. How can folks get involved, or what are we turning our attention to? Part of the next step in REP's advocacy agenda is rolling out a series of political education workshops to engage all of our member orgs and our base in pushing for solutions in the citywide People's Plan. Planning is already starting to roll out their own workshops. They're starting to get their education out and community engagement out with regard to rezonings. And other implementation items in the housing element. So we know that we need to get out there and do the same with our folks. And as a member organization of REP, HANC, of course, we invite you to attend these workshops. We'd love to have you all participate. And we also would like to invite you all, as HANC members, to attend REP meetings to get more involved. We have general meetings on the first Tuesday of the month and third Friday of the month. And 2 active committees that meet on a regular basis. Those are base building and communications. And I will just note, right now, there is no current HANC representative coming to REP on a regular basis. We do have some overlapping members show up in the space in other professional and organizational capacities. So it'd be really great if folks here, in this room wanted to get more involved. You could even help us shape what these workshops that we're going to be rolling out look like, if you're interested. So that concludes my presentation. That was a lot of info. I tried to get through as much as I could. So I'd love to, open it up for questions that I can try my best to answer, or get, any reflections or thoughts about this and the housing element and how you all see yourself engaging in this next phase of implementation. I'll stop there. folks can reach out to me at this email if they want to connect further. Thanks for letting me present.
Can I ask a question?
So are there questions or comments here? We're going to take two from here and then go to the Zoom. Okay, I saw Louise and then who is that person? All right. Okay, Louise.
You mentioned when and where they are.
I'm so sorry. I can't hear the person speaking. My apologies.
Okay, the question was, when and where are the workshops? I think that might be the two meetings you mentioned on the slide, the first Tuesday and what was it, the fourth Friday? Third.
Oh, so first Tuesdays and third Fridays of the month are our rep general meetings. So those are places folks, from HANC can get involved. Our workshops on the rezonings and housing element will start up in March. So we haven't scheduled those yet, but we can, of course, invite everyone here from HANC to participate.
Okay, is it on? Okay.
Yeah, I just have a clarification question.
No.
One of your items was something about diffusing the developer dirty bomb. Could you explain what that is, please?
I'm so sorry. The last bit of your question cut out for me. I'd love to hear it again. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Y'all are doing a great job.
She wanted to know about what the dirty bomb and circuit breaker was all about.
This is our second hybrid meeting.
No, I was just telling Joseph, I'm very impressed with this hybrid meeting. Ones that I've been in or tried to facilitate don't go this smoothly, actually. So this is very impressive. Very impressive. Yeah, Joseph, maybe I'd love to pass it to you to explain the circuit breaker a little bit. I can jump in, and then there's maybe before we go to that, the question about in person or on Zoom, is that in regards to the in-person, I'm sorry, the general meetings, Kat and Richard?
Yes, it's, you gave the dates of the workshops and the other meetings, but not where they are or how to attend them.
Definitely, yes. So our, sorry for folks in the cafe. We have folks here asking about where our general meetings take place. So our general meetings are on Zoom at the moment. Our workshops will give more details about whether those will be in person, Zoom, or hybrid. So workshops will follow up with HANC about what those look like and in what format they'll take. But our general meetings are all on Zoom at the moment.
Okay, Joseph, dirty bomb or the developer's salvation.
Yeah, that's a good one, Tess. And just if people want to be involved in those meetings that Chantel was just talking about, Chantel will put her email in the chat, and you can just contact us, and we'll add you to the calendar invite. And then you'll have the Zoom link and all that. So the developer dirty bomb and why we're calling it a dirty bomb. So basically, the YIMBY is kind of at the 11th hour, right before the approval, like the final hours of the approval process, literally. They got added into the housing element actions, a particular action that's triggered at the midway point in this 8-year cycle that triggers a whole range of things. And I'll talk about a few of them, and you'll see kind of why we're calling it a dirty bomb. So, and it will be triggered, but the trigger is basically if the city is not meeting its housing production mandates from the state, there's 82,000 units, and basically the midway point is some midway number that they've come up with, but it doesn't really matter because we're not going to meet it. So it will get triggered, and the things that happen once that trigger happens, and that's the circuit breaker concept, is that we haven't produced the number of units that we're mandated to by the state. So this kind of suite of actions gets triggered. That's the circuit breaker. So the things that get triggered is that developers who are, well, a whole kind of list of kind of upzoning and streamlining provisions take place in the neighborhoods that are colored in yellow and blue in the picture that John Tell showed earlier. Those are the well-resourced neighborhoods. Those take place automatically without any public participation. Those upzonings, kind of like further upzonings, further what they're calling constraint reductions, and further kind of concessions and streamlining for developers, for market rate developers, take effect. Then in what the city has called priority equity geographies, which is a designation that the planning developed along with the Department of Public Health, that in those areas, all developments that are already in process where developers have submitted their applications to planning, they will get automatic kind of upzoning and streamlining considerations and constraint reductions for their particular developments. So you can imagine that before this trigger happens, we're going to see a flood of development proposals from market rate developers for, in these priority equity geographies, so they can take advantage of the streamlining and upzoning and everything for their particular developments. And then if that's not bad enough, what it also triggers is what they're calling further constraint reductions. And the wording around that is so incredibly vague that, and you can see kind of in what they've lined up in some of the other provisions that they've gotten built into the housing element, that we're talking about losing inclusionary zoning, or, below market rate housing requirements on market rate developments. We could see losing Eastern neighborhoods impact fees, losing jobs housing linkage program fees, losing any kind of basically impact fees, and possibly even further removing any kind of constraints or basically on demolitions, which would then make tenants even more vulnerable than they are given the current provisions that are in the housing element. So that's why we call it dirty bomb, because the language is extremely vague, and the provisions that they're triggering when the city's not meeting its mandates are so broad and cut out the public. That's the only thing that's super clear, is that the public is even more cut out and developers have even more power in kind of determining their own process. So that's why it's like, it just feels indiscriminate and far-reaching across the entire city.
Okay. Yes, we're going to now go to the Zoom room and take we will in a moment go to the Zoom room and take the first two comments and questions. But before that, our supervisor would like to say.
I just wanted to add on that question, because I think it's really important, and it's part of the reason we announced the provisions that Joseph's talking about in the housing element. There's language, right, that says if 4 years in you haven't hit these overall goals, right, that the city, and it says the city shall do certain things. Now, I do want to maybe quibble a little bit, like the Board of Supervisors would still have. So there's not like an ordinance baked in, but generally it's true that the housing elements shall take. When you, right after that, the language on affordable housing, and this is what's so offensive about the whole approach. On the affordable housing, it says if 4 years in, we haven't hit these goals on affordable housing, we should, and it basically is saying we should consider funding and things and land banking. And why I was kind of grilling folks at housing, mayor's office of housing, that we don't even have a land banking strategy. It's like, we don't need to wait 4 years to start land banking and doing strategies to achieve our affordable housing goals. But it was that disconnect in the housing element where there's all these things that Joseph's described that are supposed to automatically happen if we don't hit our market rate housing goals. And then this really weak, vague
Yeah, he's cutting out.
this ordinance, and what the ordinance will do if it passes will be to actually keep into the affordable housing commitment.
Please repeat that. Please repeat that. Audio is breaking up.
Sure. I talked for a while, so I don't know what I need to repeat, but
The last part
just
about
the
the
last
ordinance.
part. Yeah, so the affordable housing commitments are not a requirement and there's no teeth to them. The ordinance we're proposing, should it pass, will actually put some teeth in the affordable housing requirements. And that's why we're doing that. I also want to emphasize that like REP did really incredible work and all the member organizations in dramatically improving the housing element, but some of the shortcomings that they've noted, that Chantel and Joseph have noted, are real. And the problem is, we, under state law, by the time the housing element came before the Board of Supervisors, there was no process to amend it, change it. It's an up or down vote. You vote against it, then there's this thing called the builder's remedy, which basically takes all of our zoning and other requirements off the table. So the vote, when we say it was unanimous, you know, there were a lot of folks who had significant concerns and issues with things in the housing element. The way the process works is nobody was asking anyone on the board to reject it, because frankly, it's a gun to the head kind of thing that the state has, where if you don't approve your housing element by January 31st, all these pro-developer consequences flow.
So how was our audio there in the Zoom room? You can hear okay? Good.
Yeah, that's much better, much better.
So
Turn it over to.
our first person in the Zoom room is Karen. And then Kathy. Okay. Go ahead, Karen.
My question has to do with affordable. And it covers a wide range, as everybody knows. So it's difficult to understand what's being addressed when I see the word affordable. So I wanted to find out. I'm very impressed with what you guys have done, and kudos for all the work you put in. This is terrific. But I'm most concerned with deeply affordable housing, and wanted to get a sense of maybe a percentage. When you say affordable, what do you mean by affordable, and what portion of that is deeply affordable housing, and how is that translated into a person's income?
Okay, who wants to take it?
I can start. Thanks for your question. Who was on the iPhone? I'd like to address you by your name. Was that Karen?
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Karen. Thanks for your question. I can start. That's, a huge concern of our coalition as well. And, we saw it with, I don't want to bring up something that's, kind of old news, but, the Prop D&E fight, the struggle over what does affordable mean?
Yeah.
Who affordable for whom? So, one thing we're really focusing on is, how do our communities get to define what that means? What does affordable mean to us? Because the communities we represent, we have folks who, concerns about people who might have zero income. How do they get housing?
Mm-hmm.
How do we reach the folks who are at 30 or 50 AMI, when a lot of the housing available that's affordable is, upwards of 120 to what was being proposed was 140, right? So, that's part of our agenda, is our communities being in control of how to define affordable. We know that's difficult given, there's, federal kind of definitions of affordable, state definitions of what's affordable. But I don't know, Joseph, if there's anything to add there. I know that that's something that's really important to our coalition, but you can add anything.
Yeah,
And
the only
anything
thing
on-
that I would add is the workshops that Chantal was talking about earlier. It's going to be a feature of those workshops is really digging into a whole suite of demands that we're going to be making that are going to be contrary to the rezoning that planning has already described in the housing element. And then we know they're already going to be rolling out their community input meetings that they're going to be running about the rezonings. We're going to be running these workshops to create an alternative vision for the rezonings. And a big component of that is defining what affordable is. So we invite all of you and your passion and your experience in communities to bring that to those workshops so we can figure it out.
So the next questioner on Zoom is Kathy Howard. Kathy?
Yeah, okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is really more of a heads up. The San Francisco group, the Sierra Club, just had an election and some new people have been elected to our executive committee. I've stepped down after 6 years. They're establishing a new housing committee, and I'm somewhat concerned that this new committee will not be sensitive to community concerns. This is my personal opinion. But when you start to see a lot of communications from the local Sierra Club on housing or other issues, this is what's been going on. If you want to try to join that housing committee and influence the policies, then contact me. I'll give you a little more background and the information you need. I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you.
In the room here. Okay. You can ask any of the three people. And we just need to get you the mic. No, this is for the Zoom people.
Gina, you mentioned that there are potentially hundreds of millions of dollars that are sitting not being spent by the mayor. This is because the initiatives that passed, it was a bare majority instead of 2/3. And so is the requirement that those dollars just sit in an account, or is she attempting to then backfill the projected deficit that they say we have for next year?
Audio is bad.
Does this work? Can you hear? Okay. So yeah, the question was about the funds. I referenced hundreds of millions available for affordable housing that aren't being spent. And Barry was asking about those funds. So there's a few different sources for why I made that comment. So we have 64 million that was appropriated for small site. Those funds were appropriated for a specific purpose, small sites, and things like community land trusts and co-ops, and they can't be used for something else. So they are available right now. We did a budget deal last year when the mayor refused to budget Prop I money for affordable housing. We worked with a broad coalition of affordable housing advocates, tenant rights groups, and labor, and Chair Ronan, Hillary Ronan, negotiated was sort of mediated a deal that we ended up with of $112 million. And the process is that the mayor's office has to issue notices of funding availability. Again, we can make the money available, we don't get to spend it. So that includes $40 million for site acquisitions, $12 million for educator housing, $20 million for public housing repairs, $10 million for SRO, elevator repairs. The mayor has slow walked and not issued till very recently any of the notices that the funding is available, and therefore nobody can apply for those funds. So that's money that the board is making available through long-term debt financing that the mayor's office so far has not spent a penny of. They finally issued notices of funding availability for half of it just last week. So because of all of our pressure. And so we're trying to get them to issue the other half. So that's another in aggregate $112 million. We also, the Board of Supervisors, and I'm chair of the Government Audit and Oversight Committee, commissioned the budget and legislative analysts to do an audit of the funds available to MoCD, what they've spent, what they have not spent, and how they are making decisions on what to spend and not spend. And we are told that that audit will come back soon. And we're expecting that there will be additional funds beyond the 170 whatever million I just referenced that are also available. Hope that
Okay.
answers.
Thank you. First, a comment and that usually affordability is using the HUD median income, which changes every year and it keeps going up in San Francisco, to including, I think, a family of 3 at 120,000. Now, there are many people, or at one recent meeting I was at, there were people who were shocked to find that they did not qualify for low-income housing because they did not have enough income to qualify for low-income housing. And the question then is, if when I saw on your map, Chantel, light yellow color across the Haight-Ashbury Panhandle area, it looked like the legend that said, no height limit. Did I read that correctly? And that's, I guess I'm partly asking that because a neighbor came up to me recently on the street and said, when is my building, my rent controlled building, going to be torn down? I need to know and start making plans now. So Dean, do you have any thoughts? And then Chantel, maybe. There's the map. Density decontrol, no height limit change. Okay, so that you can pack them in.
Yeah, and just to alleviate some concerns on this, like in terms of people's rent control apartments being demolished and that concern, like there's nothing in the housing element that authorizes or permits that. Like we know that there's going to be financial incentive, right? For developers are always going to look at ways, you know, especially on some of the smaller buildings, to try to reposition, you know, LSAC, kick people out, you know, condos, those TICs, all those. But there's nothing that even there's nothing in the housing element and nothing that I foresee the Board of Supervisors would approve that would change existing policy, disfavoring and not allowing demolition.
Actually, yeah, let me just jump in, Supervisor, because we might need your help on this, especially since you're the only one on the Board of Supervisors who actually understands these issues. What they're actually doing is they're changing the requirement for conditional use authorization. They're saying that if the property is vacant and if there are no rent controlled units, that they can bypass conditional use authorization. As you know, a planning staff or project planner who's sitting at their desk and they don't leave their desk, making that determination based on information they've received from a developer is a little problematic. So generally tenant advocates have used the public hearing process as either a conditional use or discretionary review to shine the light on abuses of either properties becoming vacant mysteriously, or of developers and planners not understanding what configurations are actually rent controlled. So it actually causes us a lot of concern that what they've done is they've changed this conditional use authorization and allowed basically the project planners to make that determination without any public noticing and without any public process at all.
Yeah, and I think that to the extent that we need to tighten things, like I've been assured by planning, you know, from the director on down that there's not, like that's certainly not their intent to allow demolitions. And so if there are things we need to strengthen, like I would hope we would get, you know, there's nothing that explicitly authorizes demolition of rent controlled housing. As you're saying, if there are things in the way they've done it where a planner or someone could look at plans and not know it was rent control, like those are things I think we could address at the board and kind of strengthen. You know, and if needed, look, demolitions are totally in the control of the city. I mean, and back when, I mean, this is going way back, but back when the Trinity Plaza down at Market and 8th, when that, what the future of that, and dealing with San Giacomo. I was, in my earlier days as a tenant attorney, and one of the things that we were going to do, if they wouldn't give rent control and the relocation right to return that people wanted, was to just ban demolitions. And actually Chris Daly at that time drafted an ordinance for the ballot that would have just banned demolition. So for all the state law stuff and all the things we don't control, we still control demolitions in the city. So if there are things that need to be strengthened legislative, I'm happy to work with you on that.
Okay, so going to the Zoom room, with guests, you have an opportunity to make a comment or ask a question. Yes?
Nick is not in the queue. I'd like to ask a question.
Okay, hold on a second. Are you labeled as guest, Nick?
No.
Oh, no, okay. Well, guest, if you raise your hand again, we will call on you. But Nick, would you like to speak now?
Sure. I think I put it in the chat. It's a very simple question. Can any of our proposals for affordable housing go ahead without the mayor approving, without the mayor being on board in this city where the mayor is the all-powerful political force, pretty much at the expense of anything the Board of Supervisors does?
Short answer is, in terms of spending, right? That's the mayor's job. So you can vote out a mayor if they don't agree to spend. Like, it's kind of completely nuts that we're in this climate where like affordable housing is almost everyone's top issue, and we have a mayor refusing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on affordable housing. But there's not, it's one of the reasons we want to create this way for advocates to be able to go to court on this, because there's not, under the current system, there's not a way to compel spending. Now, I don't want to sound as powerless, as that sounds. I mean, the reality is this is a game of, governing is a game of chess, or maybe more like a team sport. There's certainly things that can be done, right? I mean, look, hell, the right wing is, basically threatening to crash the whole economy if they don't get what they want. And, that wasn't like written in some playbook. That's just, they're willing to go there. There's all kinds of things that the Board of Supervisors does if there is an appetite among supervisors to say, no, we're not approving this thing that you, the mayor, really want until you spend affordable housing money. And I could get 6 or 8 of my colleagues to do that. Maybe we could compel some action. But in terms of like what we can do tomorrow, short of essentially playing a level of hardball that, you need probably a super majority of the board to play. We're doing a lot behind the scenes. There are ways we can pressure. I think the public pressure on this has an impact. Like, we do see a lot of things that initially are fought by the mayor's office and then end up happening. And so it's not as if no money is getting spent on a lot of good things, and it's coming from community organizing. It's coming from, offices like ours pressuring for that. We just had like the release of, millions of dollars of stuff that the Tenderloin People's Congress and other groups fought for and got in the budget with our support for, community-led solutions in the Tenderloin, right? I mean, that's another example where, they pressured for that. We all pressured for that. Eventually, that money's going out the door. So I don't want to paint like a hopeless picture. I think what the mayor is doing is totally untenable. Like, I don't think that she will be able to continue this game of chicken, especially since we passed Proposition H. And I frankly think if she continues down this path of being absolutely obstructionist on affordable housing, being unwilling to collaborate with anyone, like, at some point that her luck on that runs out. And I will say there has been a change in the media already on their treatment of the mayor, like people's patience, even folks on the political center and right in this town who don't share my politics are fed up with this style of governing. And I will also say that since the passage of Prop H, I've noticed a level of pettiness and obstructionism from the administration, and really what I can only describe as a kind of a spinning out. They're really angry that she has to run for reelection. A high turnout rate. She was expecting a cakewalk this year in a low turnout race when only 40% of San Franciscans would have voted. Now she's going to have to run in a very difficult race with 80+%. And honestly, this kind of stuff is going to ruin her chances of reelection. You would have to ask her, but I can tell you that she is someone who, when challenged on stuff, digs in and retaliates, and that's what we're seeing. So, but again, it doesn't make any political sense for her as someone who needs to run for reelection in a race that's going to be a difficult one for her in 2024 because of Prop H. And thank you for your support on Prop H. So, what I would say is, like, this is a long haul fight, and it's frustrating because a lot of affordable housing we could be developing is getting delayed by this nonsense. It's just like what we had at 730 Stanyon with the homeless drop-in center that you all supported, that the mayor pulled the plug on. So did she win a battle at that moment? Sure. But what's the net result? A bunch of homeless people don't get services, and she looks terrible from that. So, is that a win? I don't know in what world that's a win. But again, she has the power to spend or not spend at the end of the day. And that's why the buck stops there. But the pressure has an impact. It just doesn't always have an immediate impact.
Let me tease that out a bit, Dean, with you. So somebody could build low-income housing or affordable housing if they wanted to, as long as they didn't use state resources or city resources. Now, why would they do that? Usually they're building housing so that they get a return on the investment, and that they borrow money at high interest rate, and then they plan to sell it in a few years. So our low-income housing or moderate income housing is dependent on subsidies from the city, the region, and the state, and the Fed potentially. Could Biden come up with some money for housing? Is that the case about low-income housing?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, right? Like, the city is not the only provider potentially of affordable housing. I mean, when you look at the DMV site is a great example. I mean, we hope to have the city support, and so far the administration, planning department, others have been supportive of housing on that site. But at the end of the day, it's state land. It's likely going to, if it's affordable housing, it's going to be developed with state money. And so I think it is important, especially when we have an obstructionist administration, to not just keep the pressure on there, but to be looking at other sources of funding. We see University of California obviously doing, not everyone likes what all their plans are, but they're a developer, but they're a developer that's not subject to local approval. The state, we have another state project, right, that Mid-Penn is doing, that's affordable housing. So we got to be pursuing those. Federally, I don't know. I mean, we need a federal investment, but we're not seeing the kind of federal investment that we'd want. I think what's frustrating is, like, part of the idea of Prop I was, after being told for years and years and years, there's not enough money to do municipal housing, there's not enough money to do land trusts, there's not enough money to do limited equity co-op, there's no matching, tax credit programs. Like, we can't afford to do those, they're too expensive. So we all go to the ballot and we raise what's been like over $250 million already, with another 120 million projected this year. It's one of the few things that, despite all the economic downturn, like, we've been raising a ton of money, even when we were told by the city's economist it was going to raise 13 million a year, and then it raised 186 the next year, right? Millions and millions of dollars. Like, we did the hard work to tax, these really high-end real estate transactions to create the funds to do all this. And the mayor won't put any of it in the budget. And I know there was one question in the chat also around Prop I money, right? Like, every year think oh, okay.
Okay.
I'll wait for the question.
Okay, so we have a question on Zoom, and that's from Lisa. And anybody else in the Zoom room, raise your hand if you'd like to make a question or comment. Lisa.
Okay, thanks to Joseph and Chantel and to Dean. Yes, okay, so I'm curious. We're kind of dancing around this, but it seems like the mayor's tactic is to slow walk, stall, and stonewall. But I'm curious about the Prop I funds. Are they being held and accumulating in a safe place? Could she, is her tactic is to just not to stall, to not spend the money, but what in the meanwhile, what's happening to the money? Could she use those funds for something else? Or, you know, if we get a new mayor, what's going to happen to that pot of money? I guess I'm wondering.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Lisa. So Prop I money is general fund money, right? So when those and you can't do a transfer tax any differently in San Francisco. So the transfer tax, no matter how you write it, under state law, it goes into the city's general fund, right? So it's not like in an account just for housing. So what we did was we introduced a resolution when Prop I was pending, saying the Board of Supervisors supports this going for affordable housing. That passed unanimously at the time. All of the campaign literature, all the ballot handbook, if you look, was very clear that voters were being asked, do you want to tax these high-end real estate transactions to generate funds where the intent is to use them for affordable housing? But legally, they're not restricted to affordable housing. They go into the city's general coffers, right? The things I mentioned before, like the 64 million for small sites acquisition, the certificate of participation, COP, 112 million. Those are where the board takes legislative action to actually restrict those funds. So when we did an appropriation of the general fund money, 64 million for site acquisitions, that then becomes a restricted fund for that purpose, right? So in other words, so the short answer is each year the mayor has budgeted $0 of Prop I revenue for affordable housing. And then we've had to fight and get creative about clawing back some of that money, either through the budget process or separately. The first year we did that by winning a pretty significant chunk of money, 32 million for rent relief, which in the first year, and 64 million appropriated for small sites, and another 10 million for rent relief. So we actually, we kind of like piece by piece, we're taking chunks of the money and saying, this is Prop I revenue. We had the support of the board to keep doing that. The next year, last year, when again, she put $0 for affordable housing in her budget, despite our requests, despite community requests, the way we did it was we said, I mean, how are we going to come up with $130 million in the budget process once the mayor has given us a budget? I mean, you have to cut that somewhere. So there was no way. We would have to cut all the other supervisors' priorities just to fund. So we came up with this strategy, first time it had been used in this context, to do this long-term debt where you get the money now, and worked out a deal so that it didn't take money away from all the other priorities that were in the budget, right? So that's what we did last year. So what are we going to do this year, right? We're going to again ask the same demand. Controller says that $119 million is the projected revenue. We do our budgeting based on projected revenue. You need a line item in the budget, Madam Mayor, this year. And we will ask again. And if our voices are loud enough and if we get enough media coverage and pressure, maybe she puts something in the budget. Maybe she doesn't, right? The track record is bad. But again, folks who are advising her politically, I can't imagine anyone advising her to divert what was intended to be affordable housing money to non-housing purpose. If she's going to do that again, we'll have to come up with our next response. But in the next few months, the pressure is, I mean, the goal is to build enough pressure that she has to budget those funds.
Thank you for that. It's clear.
And Lisa, I should say that if this continues this way, and if this mayor continues not to budget it, we will have to look at a ballot type solution that precludes a mayor from playing this game. Again, that it would be a ridiculous situation to have to be in, but this is a lot of money. We got the planning department to put it in the housing element as a potential affordable housing source. So we really need to commit that money to affordable housing.
We have a question, but our guests also need to leave. So I would like Chantel, if you'd like to make any closing remarks, and Dean, and then we have one more item of agenda, and perhaps if Dean can stay a few moments and handle that one more question in a moment. So Chantel, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say, yeah, appreciate you all allowing me to share space and share some of Rep's work. We will keep in touch about the workshops coming up and invite folks from HANC to please participate and take and show up to Rep meetings. If you would like to join our general meetings, they are on Zoom. I can follow up with maybe Tess and Bruce with some of those details if you'd like to push that out to your membership so folks are aware of ways they can tap in. And then also I'll put my email in the chat one more time for folks to reach out if you want to get more info about Rep, want to get to know the housing element, implementation actions we want to take, please plug in. And we're available to y'all whenever you want to connect. So thanks again. And feel free to reach
Capture
out.
her email. Okay. All right. And Dean, any closing remarks?
No, just that somebody just texted me that there was some coverage of 730 Stanion today, and I don't know if anyone saw it, but hopefully positive. So I did want to end though on that because I know it's been such a focus. I've heard that from most of you that we're expecting possibly in the next couple of weeks to hear some news on the state funding applications on that site. So that seems to be one that at least everyone's come together on. And I just want to thank you all for your support of affordable housing at that site. And a point that I made to a reporter today, I don't know if it's in the article because I haven't read it, but a point that I made to him when he was saying there wasn't a lot of coverage of what's been going on there recently. I told him the whole saga on the interim use. That's another story. But on the positive side, I did tell him that there seems to be a lot of coverage in communities where, like on Irving Street, when there was a proposed affordable housing, and a lot of neighbors kind of rose up against it. And so one of the reasons you don't read about 730 Standing that much is that the neighborhood groups, talked about HANC's support, our office, everyone's on the same page. So I just want to maybe end on a positive note on 730 Stanion that hopefully we get the state funding approved, in the near future. And I will forever be upset with how long it has stayed empty and the obstruction of interim uses there. But I am looking forward to breaking ground and building some housing that people in the neighborhood can actually afford. What's that? Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you very much,
Thank
Dean.
you all.
Now we have one more piece of business in the meeting. Norm has gone to one of the recent meetings on Laguna Honda, and he's going to give us a couple of comments from that meeting. Yes, come over to the line and face diagonally.
Okay. Hi, folks. My name is Norm Dagelman, and I've been interested in the situation at Laguna Honda Hospital. for the last couple of months. I've also been in contact with the Gray Panthers about the situation. And at the beginning of February, there was a meeting in front of the Board of Supervisors, and which the head of Laguna Honda, the head administrator, discussed what was going on. And the situation is a real crisis, and that the federal government has basically said, we're going to move people out of there. And these are very fragile people, old people. The last time they tried to do this, 10 people died. So there was a lot of concern. They only gave 2 days deadline. I think the meeting with the Board of Supervisors was on Tuesday, and the deadline was on Thursday, in which they were going to start moving these people. And so the Board of Supervisors responded, we're just aghast about the situation and that it wasn't morally right as to what was going on. And I got up and just thanked them for their comments, and all the Board of Supervisors. And then after the meeting, I went home, and I thought that there would be a picket line in front of the health department 2 days later, but there wasn't for some reason. And maybe it's because there's a feeling that the feds are, through some bureaucratic pressure is not allowing these people to stay in the hospital. So since then I haven't heard anything, and I've been looking at the Gray Panther website for any information, and there really hasn't been. So I'm just trying to keep you up to date and a little that I know.
Okay. Does
Thank you
anybody
very
else have
much.
a note on what's next on Laguna Honda? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming this evening. And I appreciate those on Zoom. I appreciate those here in person. Remember, if you get here at the beginning of the meeting, you have an opportunity to get something to drink or eat while during something hot or cold. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll call the meeting to end now. Thank you. We survived. Wow, Bruce.